Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today, in this post-ASCO conversation, I have with me Dan Schmitt, CEO of Actuate, a company working on therapies for hard-to-treat cancers, in particular, pancreatic cancer. Welcome, Dan.
Good morning, Nicole. Nice to meet you and nice to meet your listeners.
So today, Dan and I will be discussing the Congress, as well as Actuate's lead drug candidate, elraglusib, a novel GSK3-beta inhibitor. Before we dive into all that, though, Dan, perhaps you could share with listeners a little bit about yourself and the journey that led you to do the work you do today with Actuate.
Yeah, so I have a science background. I started my professional career at a company called Burroughs Wellcome back in the late 80s. Now, Burroughs Wellcome was famous for a number of different products. Listeners may be familiar with Neosporin, Polysporin, Sudafed. I came into their proprietary division in new product development, particularly in the antiviral franchise. Wellcome was working on new classes of drugs, particularly for AIDS and herpes infections during the AIDS crisis. And so started my career in new product development and then moved into market analytics. And we were acquired by Glaxo, became Glaxo Wellcome, which became GlaxoSmithKline. And then started the career in large pharma, moved to Chicago, and worked for a company called Fujisawa, which became Astellas, and then ended up at a company called Searle, and then Searle Pharmacia, which was acquired by Pfizer. And from there, I started my career into small cap and startup drug companies. And Actuate became part of that path when I was working with academic researchers in the Chicago area. So I was an expert panelist at different universities, including University of Chicago, University of Illinois, Chicago, and Northwestern University. And the compounds that became the foundation for Actuate were a portfolio of these very potent, very specific small molecule kinase inhibitors, all focused on GSK3 beta. That were under evaluation in Northwestern Center for Life Processes and were highlighted to me as having potential for further development. And so the head of the institute there and I and a set of investors in Fort Worth decided to form a company around them. And that was 10 years ago. And we identified a lead compound and have taken it from the bench all the way to the end of these major phase 2 clinical trials. So it's been a very productive and efficient program in advancing a very promising drug.
Thank you, Dan. Quite the journey.
Yes.
A lot going on there. You've been very busy. So let's turn now to ASCO 2025. And Actuate gave an oral presentation on the new positive phase 2 combination data you just referenced for elraglusib, highlighting its potential to enhance anti-tumour activity by targeting key resistance pathways and immune mechanisms in previously untreated patients with metastatic pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, otherwise known as mPDAC, a highly aggressive, lethal form of pancreatic cancer that accounts for more than 90% of pancreatic cancer cases. Indeed, it is the most prevalent type of pancreatic neoplasm, and typically mPDAC advances to the state because of either lack of early diagnosis or limited response to treatment. So Dan, I was wondering if you could perhaps describe the landscape of unmet need for these patients in the first instance.
Yeah, so pancreatic cancer is notorious, both in the medical community and in our personal lives. Everybody that, you get to a certain age and everybody has a connection with somebody, either a family member or a friend who's encountered pancreatic cancer in their circles as well. It's It's highly aggressive in two ways. One, it typically isn't diagnosed until it's highly advanced. Usually, it's not unusual for patients to come in and be diagnosed at stage 4, which means that the tumor has progressed in the pancreas, but also is metastasized and progressed in other organs as well. And at that point, it is extremely hard to treat. There have been many attempts on new therapeutics for the treatment of pancreatic cancer, but really not much success over the last decade or so. Standard of care for these patients at this stage in their disease is one of two sets of chemotherapeutics. And the cure rate, or the what we consider 5-year survival rate, is less than 10%. So there's a significant unmet medical need here on a tumor that is, very difficult to treat. Pharma has spent a lot of time on Treasure trying to bring new therapeutics to the market and to the treatment, but with very limited success over the last decade. The last set of new drugs brought to this that showed any benefit in survival were really von Hoff's trial of gemcitabine plus Abraxane. And Abraxane is an albumin-fused Taxol. That trial was run in 2012 and showed like somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2 months of increased overall survival over gemcitabine alone. There's another standard of care called FOLFIRINOX, and it is basically 4 different old chemotherapeutics put together. And that was approved in 2010. Now, there's been a number of new therapeutics brought into the clinical trials, but none really have had an effect on increasing patients' overall survival since those 2 sets of chemotherapeutics were approved in the last decade.
As you say, it's a bleak landscape indeed. So let's turn now to elraglusib, the novel GSK3 beta inhibitor. And I was wondering if you could share with us the high-level details of the phase 2 data presented at ASCO.
Yeah, so elraglusib is a highly specific small molecule kinase inhibitor focused on GSK3 beta. And as you mentioned early on, it has a unique multimodal mechanisms of action profile. One is downregulation of key, what we call oncogenic processes. So actually trying to inhibit tumors from living, progressing, and being chemo resistant. The other set of actions is, as we have developed it, have really come to the fore in clinical trials, where it's been shown that downregulating GSK3 upregulates the patient's immune system to recognize and target the cancer as well. And so you have this unique set of synergistic processes: downregulation of the tumor itself, upregulation of the immune system against the cancer as well. And so we've advanced the development of the lead compound called elraglusib, or ELRA for short, through different clinical trials up to this phase 2 clinical trial that we presented at ASCO. And the design of this phase 2 trial was first-line treatment of metastatic disease. So it's the first time patients have been treated when they reach that point or diagnosed at that point. And what we have done is we have combined elraglusib on top of gemabraxane versus gemabraxane alone. So what we were showing is the profound effect of the combination of these agents. We enrolled over 286 patients in this clinical trial, where we randomized on a 2-to-1 basis. Patients get combination of elra plus gemabraxane versus gemabraxane alone. The power was the study had survival endpoints, because that's really the focus of patients, treaters, and the regulators at this point. And it was the study design was powered to show significance. We enrolled these 286 patients across the US, EU, and Canada. And the data we showed at ASCO, primarily focused on survival, was very compelling. For the first time in patients treated, so the efficacy evaluable patient population in which we referenced was anyone that got at least one dose in either arm. And then so these were all patients that had received treatment under this clinical trial. And the results were very compelling in terms of the median increase in overall survival was approximately 3 months in this trial, 10.1 versus 7.2 in the control arm, and a doubling of 1 year overall survival, 44% in the combination arm versus 22% in the control arm. Now, that's a highly significant effect. The p-value, which is a measure of significance, was p equals 0.0005. The study was powered to show an effect below 0.05. So we significantly, surpassed the threshold. And the hazard ratio, which is a measure in the decrease of the risk of death, the hazard ratio in the entire population was 0.63, which means we reduced the risk of death at any point on the curves by 37%. Now the trial was still ongoing while we presented the data, and we've done a number of cuts of the data as well. So there's defined subgroups, and you look across these subgroups to see if there's any differences, such as male, female, the region, North America or rest of the world, white versus non-white, less than 65 years, greater than 65 years, liver mets at baseline, no liver mets. And across all those subphenotypes, the benefit of having elra on top of gemabraxane was statistically significant in favor of the combination versus the control. So basically, no phenotypic profile either did not respond or, was favored to respond. It was a very, compelling results in these patients. We looked also at groups such as patients who could complete one course of therapy. So in PDAC, in every study, there are a set of patients who do not respond to anything. They quickly crash. Their disease is highly aggressive and highly resistant to any treatment. So we took a look at patients who were well enough to complete at least one full cycle in both arms. And the data there even becomes more compelling. There's a 4-month delta, 12.5 versus 8.5, with a p-value of 0.018, but a hazard ratio of 0.57, which means in patients who could complete at least one cycle, the risk of death by being on the combination arm is a 43% reduction. Again, a doubling, near doubling of 1 year overall survival, 52 versus 28%. We also looked at the sicker patients. So, another cut. Patients with liver mets. These are considered the patients with a poor prognosis. And there it's a near tripling of 1 year overall survival, 39 versus 15, p-value of 0.0003. And again, hazard ratio 0.62, which is another 38% reduction in the risk of death for these patients, even the ones with the poorest prognosis. So, we have a very compelling study. It's a very large study for a phase 2 trial. It's It's randomized, it's international, it's got a control group, and every cut of the data shows that being in the combination group brings significant clinical benefit on the endpoint that really matters most, patient survival. The other question was, and we get this when I'm talking to, different groups, different audiences, how do the patients, how well do they do on treatment? Because, so for example, I have a neighbor who had pancreatic cancer. He was about a decade ago. And one night I saw him coming down the block. And it was a summer's evening. He had a cigar and a scotch, right? And walking with his wife. And I was like, he said, Dan, I can't do it anymore. It's just, these treatments are so harsh that I don't want to feel like that in the time I have left. The interesting thing about the combination of elra plus gemabraxane is that by adding elra on top of gemabraxane, we show minimal additional toxicity. It really comes out in two safety signals with this drug. One is a significant portion of our patients in every trial we've done report having something called a visual disturbance. And one of them reports it's not unlike putting on Bono's blue sunglasses. The visual, everything tends to turn a little bit blue or gray in their visual field. And this is a marker of target engagement. Lilly had a GSK3 program before. Their patients reported exactly the same thing. When you inhibit GSK3, it's resident in all the normal cells in your body. And in the normal activity, it affects the metabolism of glucose as one of its activities. But in the rosin cones in the eye, it's active as well. And when you inhibit it, you downregulate, the visual field, light sensitivity, particularly in the lower part of the visual spectrum, the red part. But the way it typically occurs is patients report this when they're getting dosed, getting their IV, and up to 24 hours later, they basically go home with this, blue visual field, and then they wake up the next morning and it's all returned to normal. There's no long-term effects in terms of neuro-ophthalmic or physical. It's completely transient. And investigators know this is a marker of target engagement, and they see it as a nuisance side effect. The only other thing we're seeing is that there is an increase in what we call grade 3-4 neutropenia. It's a level of white blood cell count. And it's well known to happen with gemabraxane. A portion of their patients have it as well. We have an increase in our patients. But the unusual thing is we don't have any correlative increase in either febrile neutropenia or sepsis, just this increased level of decreased lab values. Other than that, we have no new safety signals whatsoever. So I've got elra sits on top of gemabraxane, doubles or triples the likelihood of 1 year survival or longer, but has no real new toxicities. We had a KOL meeting immediately after the ASCO data were presented, and 4 KOLs, none of which are company paid consultants. They're all independent. The only thing they had in common is they've worked on clinical trials with elra, one of which has a combination study with gemabraxane, FOLFIRINOX, the other standard care, and the other 3 are on the gemabraxane study. The interesting thing is that the FOLFIRINOX lead says the thing he likes most about elra is that its combinability. And in his patient population, he sees it giving patients their lives back. So FOLFIRINOX is a very toxic combination. It brings a lot of different safety signals, GI tox and the like. But he says he can tell the patients who are getting elra on top of that, because he says they feel better. They report feeling better. They report getting back into activities of daily living, such as driving or, going back to dance classes or things like this. And when he said that at the KOL meeting, the interesting thing was the other 3 investigators, all leaders in their institutions, said, yeah, we're seeing the same things in our gemabraxane patients. They start to thrive. They start to gain weight. They start to golf. And they were remarking on what a unique package this is to put something on top of standard of care and make patients' disease process better, but also make the patients feel better. So that was a blow away moment for me because everybody wants to know, what you're doing for the disease, but also what are you doing for patients? And this is a very unique, this is a very unique asset in the fact that it really has an effect on overall survival and an effect on, patient health. Yeah, a very unique offering.
They are indeed some compelling results there, Dan. And as you say, it's all about giving patients their lives back. So thank you for also sharing with us the cuts into the data that have happened since ASCO for ELRA. So given all this, what next for Actuate?
So we will be advancing ELRA through the process of completing this trial, submitting a dossier to the regulators, and then discussing with them the regulatory path forward. Of course, I'm a big proponent of this drug. I think there's a number of investigators that are big proponents as well. And we want to see how we get this to as many patients as quickly as possible, because what we're not doing is increasing risk. We're not taking a standard of care away. We're just adding on top of. So I think that's a worthwhile discussion with the regulators and see if there's an accelerated pathway to registration. We're also working to complete the trial in FOLFIRINOX. And this has all been done with an IV formulation. To date, we've treated over 500 patients with our IV formulation of ELRA. We've initiated and development of an oral tablet that has excellent drug-like properties, high bioavailability, that will expand the treatable population from not just those in the clinic, but those disease states such as refractory metastatic melanoma, metastatic colorectal cancer, and non-small cell lung cancers that can be treated and managed at home. We also have a Ewing sarcoma program that's coming into an advanced state. We're completing the phase 1 there, and in refractory patients, we've had CRs, where CRs typically are not seen, complete responses. So we'll be advancing that as well as we go forward.
Thank you, Dan. So let's bring the conversation back to the Congress at large now. And unfortunately, you and I were unable to connect on the ground in Chicago.
Yeah.
But tell me now, what were the key highlights for Actuate at the Congress?
Oh, I think there was a lot of visibility for Actuate. We had both a poster on the biomarker program that's very promising on identifying key pathways for the utility of this drug. But also we had a oral presentation on Saturday afternoon in one of the key areas, one of the main stages, which really highlights the importance of this data. In addition, not only were we able to share the data that I've discussed here today in terms of the significant clinical benefit in survival, but also the investigators highlighted for the first time that in pre and post treatment biopsies, there was a recruitment of CD8 positive T cells into the tumors of the combination patients that had no corresponding increase in the control patients alone, showing for the first time histopathologically that an IO mechanism based drug was having an effect in this very difficult to treat disease. And that was presented on the main dais. So that was the whole package of a new novel target with a very advanced clinical trial and a very advanced drug. We're having significant clinical benefit in a very difficult to treat disease. And we got a lot of incoming interest based on what was presented there.
Thank you. So was there anything, perhaps in your opinion, at the Congress as a whole that was maybe a little overhyped or perhaps surprisingly underappreciated?
I think there's in terms of the Congress as a whole, there is a lot of activity and a lot of presentations. I'm not sure about overhyped. because there is just a lot of compelling data being presented in a lot of different fields. I think that the path forward for us is now being appreciated. I would say that it was sort of our coming out party. So I'm hoping for a lot more momentum coming from ASCO, but it really is a matter of people standing up and taking notice of, hey, this pathway is valuable. It's working. It's worked in a very large study. And the fact that this novel new drug has combinability, and the key experts that were reviewing it say that they see this being a backbone type treatment, both in first line and second line treatment of metastatic pancreatic, potentially in locally advanced as well. And we know that there's potential synergy between this and the RAS inhibitors. And from their perspective, they will use elraglusib, across different standards of care and add the RAS inhibitor in combination where they see the patients will benefit most. So it's not, I think maybe there's a misunderstanding of how RAS and how GSK will be used separately. That's not the scientific perspective on it as it lays now. They really see, people who are familiar with both really see that elra is combinable and will be used in conjunction with the new RAS inhibitors as they come to the market.
Thank you, Dan. And finally, looking to the future horizon, in your opinion, what next for oncology and obviously specifically pancreatic cancer care in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think that what you're going to see in the next 5 years is these two therapeutic approaches being combined, the RAS inhibitors and GSK inhibitors. And I'm not a big believer that monotherapy will be the call of the day. I think there's going to be a lot of combination therapy. And with GSK, there may be also the opportunity used with PD-1 inhibitors as well to upregulate that immune response. So I see a lot of new novel combinations. I'm not believing that there is a monotherapeutic approach in the next 5 to 10.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the time.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.